Therapy Geeks, a podcast by Luke McGibbon and Louise Taylor.
Ooh, wow. Anyway, yeah. Hello. So, we're back after a short break of 365. More than that, actually, because it was the 22nd of January. So, what does that put us on? We're on the 19th now of February, and a year later. So that is. Ooh, just under a year and a month. What took us so long? What took us so damn long? I don't know. Was there any specific reason on your end? I don't think there was anything on either end. I think we're just mighty busy, weren't we?
Bit shit, but busy.
Bit shit, but busy. I mean, that's most people's year, isn't it, these days as well? I was at a comedy gig yesterday, and there was a double act MCing, and one of the acts is like a long-term married man, has a house, has a dog, thinking of kids, and the other act said to him, "How are you? What have you been up to?" And he shrunk for a second. He just completely visibly shrunk, because the idea of someone saying like, "What have you been up to?" whenever you're quite settled is somehow like a horrifying question, isn't it? It's like when things are going quite well for you and someone goes, "You've been busy," you sort of go, I guess," like, and you don't know if you have, because you've just been living, haven't you? Yeah, I think people
Yeah.
maybe, I think sometimes the question like, "How are you?" or "What have you been up to?" can feel really like loaded when you live a happy but unexciting life. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Beauty in the mundane.
I
But
fucking love some mundane. Sorry.
oh, if there's beauty in the simplicity and the mundane, like
Mm.
really, is that not the soul though? I think about
Oh God,
soul
I.
is very simple, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The needs are simple. The asks are simple of the soul. You know. Oh wait, I just felt everyone just stop listening there because I said something pretentious. I felt people switching off their
Go back to
podcast
swearing.
app. Did you hear it? I felt it.
I'm going through a divorce, so like there you go.
Well, that is a good answer, isn't it? That's pretty shit, but was it pretty shit but good? Was it, you said pretty shit but okay?
No, it's shit.
Just shit, just shit.
That's the thing about people saying, "How are you?" Do they really fucking want to know?
Oh God, I've probably guaranteed about this before, but like you know, the helpline, the suicide hotline I work on, it operates down south, and down south there's it's a cultural thing of saying "How are you?" in as greeting. So you go "Hello," and they say "How are you?" and like people do that even on the suicide hotline, and I don't know what drives me crazy, because like they don't really want my answer. Why would they? Like, imagine if you're suicidal and you call a place and you ask them how they are, and then they go into their life, you know. Anyway, so sometimes I say hello and they say how are you, and I just don't answer because they're just saying it as a hello, but I have to fight the urge to it's just every natural part of me wants to go, "I'm good, how are you?" You know, it just pisses me off. I don't know, real silly stuff, but it sits on the old noggin, so it does.
But it's kind of the formality. It's kind of the just this. It's what is done. It's kind of seen as a pleasantry. It's a
Yeah.
greeting. It's not actually. It's not actually that meaningful.
Maybe I'm
It's
just
just
not
a.
pleasant, is the problem.
No, maybe you're just wanting to get to why it's happening. What's happening?
Yeah,
This
sure.
interaction is. You know what I mean? It's like, okay,
Mm.
that's nice. Right. Okay, what's going on?
Yeah, yeah. I also just, it feels horrible. It feels kind of hollow. Like I'm talking to someone who's maybe crying or suicidal, and I say hello, and they say how are you, and I say fine, thanks. Mostly because I just want to get over the answer and get to them. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, but that's a little pet peeve of mine. So you've been getting a divorce for the last year. Is this something that you want to talk
No.
about a little on the podcast today, or should I
Not
just
really.
leave it?
No.
Yeah.
No, and not really. And I'll tell you why. It's out of
Mm.
respect for my children more than anything.
Yeah. Well, that's
As
good.
well,
Yeah.
yeah. And also, they are the best things that have ever happened to me.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
no matter what, and it has an impact on them
Mm.
how and they've gone through. It's hard. It's very difficult for them.
Mm.
But forgiveness, and this is where we were going to talk about forgiveness. I think this is really important because I think I will talk about like conceptually and theoretically how I think about divorce has really changed, and I feel like devastated that my marriage didn't work.
Mm.
Absolutely devastated. I think even no matter how crap the marriage is or whatever, I do think there's a devastation, a heartbreak, even when
Mm.
it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
even when you know it's for the best. And that I think that's the hardest thing, the spiritual, the emotional, the psychological pain that comes with going through this process, because I just think it's inevitable that you will feel this pain no matter how bad the marriage is, because there was a lot of love but it just didn't work. So that's so there's I've been trying to process a lot of forgiveness because of things that happened last year, and because divorces are, and you know what, any solicitors listening, don't give a shit how you feel about what I'm going to say next. Oh my God. The legal system is evil when it comes to this. I mean, they really, and my solicitor I really like, and I will say that, like, I do like him, but the legal system goes out of its way to profit from the pain that the end, like divorce, it does. It makes things, it tries to make things harder, and there's such a level of arrogance and cruelty, and they bring up the shittest things that happened, and they throw any bit of crap about you, any of your flaws, anything at all. They try and really demonize and really, really make a painful situation. They monopolize on that pain. And that's something that there's had to be a lot of deep breaths taken, a lot of like trying to find a way to navigate this with integrity, decency, and humility and kindness to each other, even though we're not in love anymore. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's a system that's like focused solely on the sort of the ins and outs of, it very much just the facts, no emotions. Whereas divorce is like an emotional process, isn't it? And it's kind of like mourning in a sense, because any end of any relationship is comparable to grief of sorts, isn't it? And mourning is a lot like forgiveness in that it's kind of and maybe I'm wrong. I hope to God I'm wrong, but it's like it's a process, and it's in my head I call it a Nike process, because you just do it,
Yes.
Like if you say to someone you need to mourn, they might say how.
Yes.
I don't know, just do it. Like it's something that is unique to you, that people do it in different ways. And yeah, forgiveness is like that, because we're going to talk about processes, and I've got a fair idea of ways of going about forgiveness, but there is a point at which it is just something that is done, or it is just something that happens at the end of something that you're not entirely in control of. But there are elements that are conscious and there's some that aren't, is what I'm trying to say. So, well, it sounds to me like you have some forgiving to do yourself.
Yeah, and of myself too, because I wasn't, that's the reflection, the contemplate. But I've got a Fred Rogers quote. And the other thing I'd like to say about solicitors is barristers, they bully you. They're they're educated well, very versed, very articulate bullies. So they bully to try and get results for their clients. And that is rewarded in that system. So I want to say, right, this is a Fred Rogers quote: "Forgiveness is a strange thing. It can sometimes be easier to forgive our enemies than our friends." And this is the one. "It can be hardest of all to forgive people we love." And I think the reason I'm struggling is because I gave him my heart and he didn't cherish it and protect it and look after it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I see what you mean, yeah. Forgiveness is hard as well. Like, that is sort of at the core of what we're talking about today, that it is, well, that it's obviously a very complex thing, but it's rarely easy. I think you've also talked about self-forgiveness as well, which is like, that's maybe when people think of that, they think of just when doing something wrong. But I also think that self-forgiveness has a greater role in therapy as a whole than we realize. Like people who have like a negative inner voice, who have a harsh inner critic. I mean, that really, isn't there a part of them that they need to forgive themselves, or people who are depressed, often need to forgive themselves multiple times, because maybe you can't get out of bed. Maybe there's things that do make you feel better when you're depressed, and you just lack the energy and the motivation to do that. And that's, I want to normalize that and say that's kind of part of it, like maybe that if I went for a jog, or if I meditated, or if I did this, I'd feel better, and I'm unable to. So the depression is my fault, and in that situation, all you really have control over is sort of the acceptance of yourself in that moment as being someone unable to do that, and acceptance of the depression as something that has control for this moment, and forgiving yourself, is sort of is kind of the only pathway back towards, well, I suppose, motivation or energy, in my opinion. Anyway, obviously it's a lot more complicated than I'm making it, but yeah, it's one of those things.
No, I was just thinking, but it's like one of the things is also, what is it like, it's a process. It's such an individual, unique process that I think our values, our beliefs, our experiences, and who we are, I just think the beliefs and the values and all come into it a lot more than we realize.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. Like, absolutely. And it's got multiple components, really, hasn't it? Because it is something that's cognitive, saying or thinking I forgive you, but it's also something that's emotive, which is the felt sense of forgiving someone, the lightness. And I suppose to an extent you could argue it's a behavior too. I'm less attached to that. Unless well, I was about to say I'm less married to that, but that's maybe a sensitive word to use given what you're going through.
You can say the word married, I'm not.
Okay, good. I just, what, that's a phrase I've been using lately is, I'm saying, oh, I'm not married to this idea or something, so I don't want you thinking I'm just unconsciously just rubbing it in. Rubbing it in, basically. So, cognitive, emotive, and I suppose somewhat behavioural. And the three are sort of more in interplay than one realises. Like, do you remember even when you were a kid, and I mean, you had siblings, didn't you, Louise?
Yeah.
Yeah, my brother and I, we were at each other's throats a lot, and sometimes, your parents would say sorry, and and you would say sorry, and that's the cognitive bit, and they'd say, and mean it, you have to mean it. It's is it that easy to make somebody mean it? Is it that easy to make someone understand? It's rarely as simple as that. But not to say it was the wrong thing to do. I don't know if it is or not, but it's a good intention to sort of make someone realize that it's not as simple as throwing a few fucking words around, is it? There's something internal. So I mean, what is it? Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like that's probably a good place to start, isn't it? I mean, what is it to you?
Right, so I think it's you're getting to the place where you let them off the hook, kind of thing. You kind of
really,
not off it, but like, you've worked through those feelings, you've worked through those emotions, and you've come to a place where it doesn't impact. It doesn't. You actually, for me, it's I want the best for everybody. But if I haven't forgiven somebody, it's I can't face them, I can't tolerate, I can't have them in my space, I can't, but I have to work through those. So they'd be very intense. And I will say this, right? If people don't really care that much about things or people, they can forgive a lot easier. You see, the sensitive, more loving, more really caring people, they will wrestle with the more intense emotions and feelings that come with being betrayed, being abused, being mistreated, or, I don't know. A lot of forgiveness is coming from a place of pain. Deep psychological and emotional pain. But for me, it's you've done that work. I think a lot of it is emotional and psychological and spiritual work. And you come to a place where you want them to be well in the world, and you feel a peace about what's happened.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think you've pretty much hit a couple nails on the head there. I think it's a lot of things, and it's not a lot of things as well. Because I think a lot of people have different ideas of it. Because, well, all right. I mean, forgiveness is a very basic thing that we're taught about from when we were a kid, but it's got multiple levels to it, and in the same way that racism has got different levels to it. Actually, I'll be real quick on this, but I see some people complaining about what racism is and how it's defined these days, and that's because when they were a kid they were taught that racism was just don't think you're better than any other race, and it's obviously so much more complex than that when you think of sort of systemic racism and sort of racist outcomes in society. But then they're adults and they're like, well, I thought it was just don't think you're better than anyone else, I don't see color, all that stuff. And I think they're outraged that there's more complexity, because which I suppose it to an extent is understandable, because it's annoying whenever you think you know the rules of a game and then someone tells you the rules are different. And so I think that forgiveness has different levels to it depending on your experience of it as a kid. It's certainly not vengeance anyway. It's I think some people think I can't forgive until I've had my vengeance, and vengeance is vengeance is Batman, isn't it? Like that's a lifetime commitment to never feeling any better. Street violence, I suppose. Like, so I would say that one thing is, first of all, is like letting go of the need to punish the, let's say, perpetrator. I can't think of a better word for it. I think that it's, yeah, letting go of the need to punish the perpetrator or the need to punish yourself, you know, because so many people, oh God, I'm afraid I'm just saying, I have little spiels I go into, I'm afraid I'm repeating myself, but like, I think so many people would try, and if there's an emotion they don't like or something they do that they don't like, they would try and use shame as a method of behavior change or shame as a method of changing the emotion, and that never really works. Usually you still have the behavior, more usually you will still have the same feeling, but you'll have the shame on top of it. So it's kind of like what we were saying earlier about feeling unmotivated and knowing there's things you can do that make you feel better. You try and use shame. You know, you go, oh fuck, I'm such a lazy bastard. I should be getting out of bed and doing this, and then you don't get out of bed, and so you feel bad for not getting out of bed, but you also feel the shame of it on top of that. So I think it's, you know, internally, if you're punishing yourself, that's the aspect that you're letting go of, the need to punish yourself. I think it's not quite, I think, letting people off the hook so much, because I think that's one of the barriers to forgiveness, is the feeling like, oh, I'm condoning this if I forgive it, or I'm letting them off the hook, or I'm, more often than not, I'm letting myself off the hook. You know, I've definitely said this before, but like on the helpline and in counselling in general, you see a lot more cheaters than you do people who've been cheated on. And you know, because it's obviously an incredibly frowned upon behavior, and it's an issue of responsibility. Sometimes people will say, well, to hold myself responsible, I have to punish myself, you know. And you know, you don't have to live in a cave and punch yourself in the face for the rest of your life. You can, if you've done something bad, you can hold yourself responsible, you can grow, you can feel necessary levels of guilt, but past a certain point, shame's doing you no good, really, is it?
Well, this is where it's important, I think, to, is it letting them off the hook for you, not them? Because this has come up in written notes about, like, it can be used often in Christian supremacy, forgive while they oppress, you know, or Christian or white supremacy, that whole idea, if you're aggressive or angry at your oppression and the abuse, then you need to forgive us because we're like superior beings to you, because, you know, we are, you know, we're Christians. And that kind of forgiveness, where it's been kind of used to gaslight, it's been used as a way to kind of suppress people expressing their anger and rage and fury at injustices, at the terror that their people or their communities have been subjected to. You know, it's often been used as a way to say you need to forgive people and let God into your heart, because we're here to terrorize and brutalize your community because we're white and we're Christian and we're this, you know what I mean? So that's where it maybe has been misappropriated, that whole idea. Whereas I actually think I can forgive people for what they've done to me and make sure it never happens again, and either maybe never speak to them again, never have them in my life, never have life. So it's kind of letting them off the hook for you to have that inner peace to be able to move forward with your life. It's not saying that behavior is acceptable and it was all me, which is very important to make sure that they don't internalize maybe the mistreatment that they've had or the abuse. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is actually working through that so that you come to a place of peace. But that does not mean you take that crap, or that does not mean what they did was okay, or that does not mean it should have happened or it was fine that it was happening. It actually means the opposite. It just means that you're in a better place to live a better life because you've worked through that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, yeah, because forgiveness can be weaponized in that sense, can't it? It can be like, forgive me, and then that's used as an excuse to lure someone back into a situation where that behavior is going to repeat. And it certainly it doesn't lend itself to inauthenticity or the papering over of things. I think there's a real difference in feeling between authentic and inauthentic forgiveness, you know. But I mean, I'm going on a tangent, to be honest, from what you said. That's not quite what you're talking about. Like, but it certainly doesn't mean you have to make yourself weak and prostrate yourself before an abuser, you know, or to return to an abusive situation. But I suppose I'm just putting my trust in people's sort of internal self-direction to know when the difference is there, I suppose. I think like one of the to me a red flag is someone who's trying to make you forgive someone, because
Yeah.
like while forgiveness is one of the most healthy things, like there's my research for this episode. There's a million studies saying associated with better heart health and better physical health and better sleep and all this stuff. Like you don't need me to tell you that forgiveness is good for you and unforgiveness is bad for you, but like I wouldn't go around in with clients recommending it. Like I don't go to them. You need to forgive this person. You need to forgive that person. Because like in the same way that you can't make someone go to therapy. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Like with forgiveness, I don't even take people to the water. They have to. In my head, they have to find their own way there because I
Yeah.
mean imagine telling someone who's been sexually assaulted to forgive their perpetrator.
Oh, fuck, that's
It's not
awful.
yeah, exactly.
Like,
It's not my place to
so
even
cruel,
suggest
I
it.
think. I think that's
Yeah,
cruel.
yeah.
Particularly that's people
Like
who've been through that kind of terror.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I wouldn't go. And there's a million examples of. I tell you what, even if you YouTube TED talks about forgiveness, there's about at least three off the top of my head of people who are like giving TED talks about somebody murdered their family, somebody murdered their son, somebody murdered this person, that person in their life, and they've forgiven them. Like people have adopted people who've murdered family members, visited them in prison. Incredible, incredible examples of humanity. But I mean, it's not a direction I would push someone in because it's insensitive. It's a place they came to themselves. And
Yeah.
I think to return to something you said earlier about forgiveness, it's like it's when you've worked through all the feelings.
Yes.
Because there's about 4 or 5 different sort of process models of forgiveness, and they all have that in it. They all have, you have to work through the feelings, you have to feel the
Mm.
feelings, you have to honor the feelings. Like, you can't truly forgive someone if you're still whole, if you've not honored those feelings in yourself. All of them have an emotional component that are about you. So I guess to include in a definition of forgiveness, it would be, well, it would be about holding on to both the hurt that was caused to you as well as the humanity of the perpetrator. One is not forgetting the other. And a lot of good forms of therapy involve holding two very different feelings and just allowing yourself to have both of them. I don't know, but maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's just me.
Well, I think there's an Emma Goldman, the wonderful old anarchist. Which as I age, I'm becoming more and more, especially with a non-functioning government. I'm like, wait,
Oh
this
yeah,
anarchism.
we've all got a bit of Bernadette Devlin in us now, haven't we?
Oh, I love Bernadette. Oh, I love her. She's an incredible woman. So here, Emma Goldman said, before we can forgive one another, we have to understand one another.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Well, I think that is part of the sort of the process model that I would adhere to, is that understanding the sort of, first of all, the feelings of the other person, and the whatever drivers may have put them there. Like maybe they had a very difficult past or anything like that. And I'm not saying let's forgive everyone horrible because maybe they had an abusive parent or anything, but I guess I'm talking about introducing complexity. But I'll probably get onto that actually. But I think like it's a big part of I think trauma recovery, as well. And
Mhm.
again, not one I would encourage, but hopefully somebody lands there. There was a great talk by Dolph Lundgren. The martial artist actor. He was in Rocky 4. He was Ivan Drago. Yeah, yeah, for real. Gave this great TED talk about his life and how his dad was abusive towards him and his mother, and how as he got older he started drinking heavily. He ruined all of his relationships through infidelity. And then, he talks about healing, basically. It's called Unhealing and Forgiveness. Good TED Talk. And yeah, like at one point he says, and I started to forgive my father. And I noticed as well that it wasn't something he set out to do. It was something that came out of the process of it. But that was something that was really important to his recovery from the trauma. So good on Dolph. He was also very well spoken and calm and everything. And yeah, it's just nice. Yeah.
Something else I want to ask, right? See the dark triad. Have you any interest in the dark triad personality types, like the sociopath, psychopath, Machiavellian?
Not as much as I should have. I've heard of it, the dark triad of things. Yeah, but like, yeah, no, I've not gone in depth in it at all. No, why?
I just don't think forgiveness would be something they would give a shit about. It wouldn't occur. It wouldn't be something they'd have to process or work very hard on. I think for people who are in a lot of pain, if there is a lot of fury, a lot of anger, a lot of towards something, it's because they've really. It's kind of trying to look at that hurt, like what is that wound? What is that? Now with the Machiavellian types, they would just seek vengeance or whatever. That's what they would. Whereas for somebody who's expressing, like they're really upset about something and they're expressing that, and people are like, you need to get over that. You need to move on from that. I think they're not understanding that how important that relationship or person was to them, and that's why it's taken them so long. Because it meant something to them. Whereas to people who are really callous and have lack of conscience, and they're definitely not the people who will come to therapy because they see nothing wrong with themselves. They think like the people are in therapy because of the dark triad personality types, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't think those personality types will have a hard time with forgiveness because it won't even matter to them. They don't care.
Perhaps not, but I'd be very careful about making evil something diagnosable. I mean, again, I've not gone in depth about here's the thing. Moral panics around pedophilia, to me, right? I promise I'm not going off topic here. This is relevant. And to me, that is because, well, the act of pedophilia is something that's sort of unquestionably evil, and there's not much of that around anymore since probably the end of World War II, because as life has gone on, I think we realise that even some of the most evil people in our lives, there is a certain complexity to them, and it becomes a lot harder to project all our evil qualities onto sort of modern villains whenever you realise that, they had a traumatized childhood. So it doesn't mean that it make it okay, but it makes them more complex. Whereas I think sometimes we crave a real simple villain, and so it's very easy to have a moral panic about pedophilia because you go, he's evil, so you don't have to look inwards at yourself. And so I'm really conscious about the overuse of the word narcissist these days, because
yeah, me too.
I feel like people are, I don't know, I like it's
toxic.
Yeah, not to say that narcissists don't exist, and that's the idea of diagnosis as a whole, like so many diagnoses are people don't realize they're concepts rather than like a physical thing that if you cut open a narcissist's brain, you won't find like a narcissist section. Well, I mean, maybe you'll find different bits that light up and that have different tendencies, but I don't know.
How would somebody with narcissistic personality disorder get to a doctor and say and make that referral and get to the process? That's the whole point. But narcissism, but the culture rewards it rewards the dark triad personality type. It rewards that lack of conscience. It rewards defeating people at all costs. I'd say it's a culture. We have really I hate the word talk, but we have cultures where oppressing and annihilating people at all costs are rewarded.
Certainly.
So if and you're seeing it played out on the global scale at the minute in terms of wars and stuff, they annihilate at all costs. We are superior. I don't think it's evil is rewarded. Noam Chomsky writes, he's brilliant at this. So I think of it, you're picking pedophilia, and that would be what I think. I think they're easy targets. So that would be easy because it's seen as abhorrent, and absolutely, of course it is. But actually, I would look more at it as the type of people running fossil fuel companies. Or the people who don't care about the fact that mass genocide's happening or this. So they're all distracted by. The paedophile, everybody, that's a safe target. We'll release all our shadow work that we refuse to do on ourselves. We're going to direct it outwards. But I think more in terms of forgiveness is something that people who are highly sensitive and maybe struggle with at times because of their oppression and other things. Whereas certain personality types or certain individuals, it won't be because they don't care if anybody hates them. They don't care if people are suffering. Won't feel that depth of emotional pain. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's well, and of course, as we said, that not allowing yourself to feel feelings and not allowing yourself to be close to your pain is a barrier to forgiveness. It's another stone to carry in your heart, and I suppose is why the vengeance doesn't lend itself to forgiveness. It's probably why as well that so many spiritual traditions tend to, at the very least, pay lip service to forgiveness, that they have aspects of it in everywhere, like you've got it in Buddhism, you've got it in Christianity, you've got it in Jewishness quite a lot. Apparently, a rabbinic teaching is that God's forgiveness is 500 times his anger, which that sounds like a nice God. That sounds like a God worth knowing. But yeah, and one of them really stood out to me was the Hawaiians have this they have this forgiveness ritual called Hopopono.
Oh, I
There's
love
an
it.
apostrophe in there.
Ho'oponopono.
Hopop.
Yes.
O-N-O. Yes, Hopopono.
Healing prayer.
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's like it literally means correction, or it's like a mental cleansing, and they sometimes use it for illnesses even. But they gather the family or a respected outsider, and they do a prayer. They state the problem. They discuss the transgression. They're expected to work through the problems and cooperate, not hold fast to the fault. There might be some silence, reflection, and everyone's feelings are acknowledged. Whoa. And then confession, repentance, and forgiveness take place. Everyone releases each other. They cut off the past, and they close the event with like a ceremonial feast. And they might give one of them flower necklaces, that you get in Hawaii. Isn't that lovely? Something real ritualistic.
Is that not the I love you, please forgive me, thank you, I'm sorry, I love
I
you,
think
please
so. I think you're right. I think it is that.
and you keep chanting that, like, I'm lovely, or I love you, please forgive me, thank you, sorry, I'm sorry.
Mm.
But that was the other thing is about processing, like, because there was a big thing since I returned with the school that I went to. I went through a real process of writing, and they said that me writing and expressing it was a vendetta and vengeance, but it wasn't. It was actually me. I was accused of that being a vendetta, so I wasn't even allowed to express the
Mm.
anger and disappointment. And that is something that I think people, particularly in Northern Ireland, are really bad at. They feel attacked a lot if somebody expresses an opinion they don't, or an experience they don't like. Because they're so scared of many people are so scared of being seen as making mistakes or imperfect. So, I think people, particularly the community I was born into, I think they're terrible, a lot of them, and this is through real painful experiences, and I can't generalize, but I will talk about Mid-Ulster and my community. I think they're terrible at owning their humanity, their humanness. They're, particularly like I'm from a very middle class Protestant. Oh my God, they're shocking at owning their own flawedness. I call it flawsomeness. Like, I'm really good at that, but that makes it easy for them to say, well, you're just, you're mad in the head. You're not right. We're perfect. And I'm like, don't be so absurd. You're not. You've made loads of mistakes. We've all made mistakes. And I think that's hugely, like, I don't have much to do with them. I'm not interested. And I found my own community and I'm very happy in many ways. But that community, I think they're terrible at working with people to process difficult events. I think they're terrible at it. Not even just bad, really terrible, because they're so scared of being seen as potentially flawed.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like Northern Ireland is kind of the world capital of tit for tat, isn't it?
Yes.
And the world capital of intergenerational trauma. And I suppose this is where what we're talking about has its place locally. Is to, in a sense, to say it stops here. It stops with me.
Yes.
It's interesting because in the research I did for this episode, like Northern Ireland came up about 3 or 4 different times. When people internationally want to study forgiveness or do something regarding conflict resolution forgiveness, they come here to do the research. The world capital, name that came up was a guy called Fred Luskin who did a study here where he, it was whether or not forgiveness was a teachable skill, and he did it during the Troubles supposedly, and he found that it was. So yeah, isn't that nice? Maybe it's not just not such a Nike problem after all. I don't know, but
but victimness and victims and forgiveness. Because I think we've talked about this before. If everybody in the country's a victim, who's a victim? I think there's so many people here that they, it's really, it's a really hard one because how, the injustices are still happening.
Mm.
There's still, Cornell West says, tenderness is what love feels like in private. I love it. And then
I like that.
justice is what, love looks like in public. And how can any of our services or states or anything expect people to heal when 50 years later or decades later there's still no justice in the most heinous and disgusting of atrocities? So I love it when America's like, you got to forgive and heal. Whatever, America. That's not your place. Your place is to actually take on the states that are making it difficult for people to heal. Your place is to say, give these people answers, let them rest, give them peace. It's not up to the individuals, I think, to forgive when it's the states that are constantly, institutionally and systemically abusing them, even decades later.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah,
you know what I
absolutely.
mean?
Well, it's interesting because I heard, because we're talking about justice, really, aren't we? There, and the way I heard it put in one, fuck, I can't remember where I read it. Justice is figuring out what is owed, and the justice system is figuring out what is owed to society, and those two things don't always necessarily correlate. Because what is owed to society is sometimes it's a better justice system, or sometimes
Yes.
sometimes it is something, some action against the state rather than say an individual. Of
Yeah.
course, the legal system is a slow-moving beast at the best of times.
It's the justice system. There's no justice. The
Oh well, I
justice
mean, yeah,
system is there to defend the status quo, and the status
absolutely,
quo is
yeah,
dysfunction. I feel
yeah,
sorry for the police actually a lot of the time because they are supposed to maintain dysfunction, and the justice system is an absolute joke. They maintain the status quo, so they actually. You look at the laws. The laws in this country are to defend the elite and the like those in the.
oh yeah, not just in this country, like certainly, well, even the what was the saying as well? I'm gonna paraphrase it because I can't remember it, but it was basically any crime where the punishment is a fine for a rich person. That's just the price.
Yes.
The price of doing that thing. They can, a rich person can park on double yellow lines the rest of his life, and just pay the fine. So it would be not simple to fix this, but like there's things that could be done that have never been done. Like perhaps a fine should be decided by a percentage, rather than.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's off the top of my head. But that's probably a pretty simple illustration of how there's very much a different justice system for rich people than there are for. I mean, who could get away with what Bill Cosby got away with, for example? Rich people can afford 1 million experienced lawyers who can basically fuck around until you end up with a slap on the wrist. But
Yes,
yeah,
judges are actually farcical at the minute. Like just
particularly
some
in
of the
America.
things. Did you hear about what the judge said in my area whenever he was
I did hear about
sentencing?
that actually.
He was
Yeah.
sentencing somebody for a sex offence. Now thinking
Yeah.
and like coming
Not
at it
good.
from the perspective of the victim and the victim's family. Right? The judges are disgraceful and nobody actually says to them because they're all called your worship. Like it's an absolute joke. He said, when summing up, you know what, once this is sorted, you can go and find yourself a nice wife and start a family. Okay, judge, so are you going to set him up with one of your daughters? Are you?
Yeah.
Going to set him up with your niece? Are you, judge? What exactly are you? What woman are you sending this man who, when you read, can you imagine the victim's family hearing that come out of the judges and their daughter? Any woman who goes through the justice system is being violated, particularly when it's a sexual assault, because they do everything they can to prove it didn't happen. That's what a defence does. So then the judge ends that case by suggesting that he should go and start a family. Like, how does they have no empathy, these people, for actually the people who are suffering. And they think they're morally superior. But I think people like that won't have to actually deal with forgiveness a lot because they've got a lot of privilege. Whereas you think of the families of Bloody Sunday, Ballymurphy, all of them. dare anybody? Who's anybody in a position of power to tell any of those people to forgive anybody?
Oh yeah, absolutely not. Yeah, and of course, the length of the legal process can mean that it takes a very long time for people to work through their feelings and their of anger and grief regarding these big things. Which, as we
Yes.
said, is such a vital part of the sort of journey of forgiveness that people are sort of end up in this extended situation for years of pain, because of the slow movingness of the legal system. But I would also say that judge, it's not just a lack of empathy for the person who suffered at the hands of this guy. It's also limited ideas of how people grow, and maybe that comes from a belief in the current system of imprisonment as recidivism. Because like really the point of a prison should be reform, but ultimately it's about punishment, and punishment does not, in the same way that shame does not help you change your feelings or help you change your behavior, punishment does little of the same. Prison recidivism in, say, well, let's say Northern Ireland, let's say America, let's say the UK, in places like this compared to, say, well, Dutch prisons, which are, if we had a Dutch prison here, it would be in the Daily Mail every day, getting lambasted because it's incredibly lenient, it's incredibly comfortable, and they get therapy and they get support and they're friendly with the guards. Level of violence in these prisons is so low. Level of recidivism in these places is so low because people come out of prison sort of able to live, sort of ready to get back into the world. Whereas if you punish people and make life difficult for them, yes, sure, maybe they deserve that, but I mean, they're gonna have little option whenever they get out. Other than return to crime, forgiveness, like not forgiving, can imprison you and the other person. The old parable told by Buddhist teacher Jack Cornfield about two former prisoners out in the world. One says to the other, "Have you forgiven our captors yet?" And the other one says, "No, never." And he says, "Well, then he still imprisons you." And I have totally forgot the point I was trying to make, but I guess I'm saying that hatred imprisons us. Forgiveness is a big part of Buddhism. So, like,
I've
there's
missed the stories.
my wee natters. There's a Buddhist alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I think's good because like AA is grand and all, but there's some people don't like AA, and if you're an alcoholic and you don't like AA, your options are extremely limited. So there's a thing called Refuge Recovery, and basically it's a fuck ton of meditation and meetings, but it's more than that. It's more than that, but in short, it's that. But one of the daily practices is a forgiveness meditation every day, and I don't know, I just like that.
Forgiveness is love. And it's
Yeah.
for you. It's for you. It's not for so for anybody going through massive injustices. I'm like, forgiveness does not mean you forget. And forgiveness does not mean you're not an activist. And forgiveness does not mean that it didn't happen. It's just that it's actually probably it's just doing that work, doing that, honoring yourself enough and loving yourself enough to do that work to try and release that pain. Also about trying to get this, I think the body holds the score. So if the forgiveness is showing you unhealed parts, so it's trying to get that out of your body so that you can walk into healthier relationships and walk into healthier life where that isn't internalized anymore. It isn't jading, it isn't clouding the way you view everything. I just think it's not for them. It's not for the perpetrator. That's the most important thing I want people to maybe come away with. You forgiving them is not for their benefit. It's for yours.
Yeah, because the need to punish and the need for revenge is something that weighs upon you. So, like, why do you think it's so hard?
Forgiveness?
Yeah.
Because it's painful.
Yeah. I suppose I think we just keep coming back to the difficult feelings that need to be processed before you. Well, James Baldwin said, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. And yeah, that's kind of at the core of what we're saying, aren't we? That it's an internal shift, but it's not something that can be done without working through what comes up first of all. But I also think sometimes that like it can feel like surrendering or giving up, or sometimes a big one is sometimes we're waiting for an apology, like, and I don't know if that's always the best thing to do, because that puts you in the thrall of the perpetrator again. Because like, what is an apology other than someone else's permission to feel bad or angry or sad for something they did, a validation in their eyes. It gives them a lot of power if you're waiting for an apology for them, you know. Forgiveness doesn't have to be about them, as you say, you know. Like, you don't even have to fucking talk to them. They don't need to acknowledge your pain for you to be able to honor it, you know. It's in a way it's saying to the perpetrator, I don't need anything more from you. You can fuck off now.
Yes, and that's it. Like, no justice, no peace. But it's also, I don't know, like, see my pain. How many times do we judge behavior and we go, look, that's wrong? Like, I think about, because I'm real neurodivergent therapist and autism, and I think about young children who are having meltdowns and all, and often we see the behavior, we don't see the pain. So see my pain, and I just think compassion always wins. But people are shit at it. They're really shit. And it's because of compassion fatigue. It's also because they feel attacked, or they don't know how to deal. People don't know how to deal with pain, they turn away. A lot of people turn away because they're in so much pain themselves a lot of the time that they don't want to meet somebody else's. But like, compassion always wins, and a lot of the time people want their pain to be seen and acknowledged. And it's simple as that. Sometimes people just need to, I see you, I hear you, I love you kind of thing. I say that, I'd be thinking that a lot. I see you, I hear you, I love you. And they just need that. But the state doesn't do that. I think states are set up to just avoid taking responsibility and to defend the state at all costs. So that's the way they are.
And I suppose in a metaphorical sense, you know, the state is similar to many people who wrong us. You know, they don't feel that they need to apologise, or they feel that to apologise for one thing would mean they'd need to apologise for a lot of things, and that would leave them feeling vulnerable. And so sometimes, you know, the only person who can see and validate those feelings is you, you know. Sometimes it'll have to be enough to go, I know that this made me feel like shit. I know that this was manipulative or infuriating or hurtful and willful, and that has to be enough that I know that. Like, you know, so many people, they go back and forth, first of all, in forgiving people, but people who escape abusive relationships, how many times do you, you know, to the listener perhaps, how many times do you sometimes think to yourself, was that abusive though, or am I just being melodramatic? You know, was that abusive? Was I or was I in the wrong? And you know, those are not relevant questions. What's relevant is how those things made you feel. You know, did you feel hurt when they did that? Well, then that's all that matters. It was wrong. It was, you know, did you feel pain? You know, nobody can take that away from you. No one can take away what you feel about how you feel. You know, they can't tell you that you were wrong to feel angry, because emotions aren't necessarily something you always have 100% control over anyway, you know. And
also, I just want to bring it back to my favourite special interest and hyperfixation at the minute, love, which is when if somebody loves you, they cherish, protect and adore you. They don't want to hurt. They don't want to hurt you. They want you to be protected and to be looked after and to be valued and to be adored. And that's where I'm heading for. Hopefully in the future, when I'm ready and now healed and done lots of work, I meet somebody who's going to take my heart and they're going to cherish, protect and adore it until the end.
Good. And, you know, and like, oh gosh, this is going to sound so pessimistic, and I mean it optimistically. Like, even if that never happens, it can be enough that you take yourself and cherish yourself.
Yes!
Do you know what I mean?
That's why would I settle?
Yeah.
Yes, so the more I love myself and forgive and work on that, then it's okay if that doesn't come into my life.
I mean, I have mixed feelings about settling, because if women didn't settle, no one would have ever been with me. But I do see what you mean though as well. Like, I guess just we mean the same thing essentially.
I want to say before I go, see, forgiveness and that journey and healing often involves isolation or solitude, and also there can be incredible beauty in that. So taking yourself to really do, I think if there's something that's really hurt, you need that solitude and that contemplation and that introspection to do the work to process and release those emotions. And that sometimes, Carl Jung says, sometimes we will do the most extraordinary things to avoid our own soul. I think you need to do a lot of that work on your own, alone.
Sure. Well, there's a certain amount of inward looking to do, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we going? I've got a bit more in me. If I
Wait, well, wait, is that the end?
no, I mean I've got a bit more in me. I've got another 5 or 10 minutes if that's all right.
Let's go for it.
Okay, cool. Because we talked about what it is and why is it hard, and I feel like that would be a bad point to leave the listener. I guess I've been looking at different sort of models for it, and there's a few things I recommend looking. There's a guy called I think it's Robert Enright, and he has like a 20-step process model for it. We'll put it on the Facebook, which I'm not going to go through that with you because it's quite long. Like, I'll go through it very quickly, but it's like preliminary. So, who hurt you? How deeply? On what a specific incident will you focus? What were the circumstances at the time? The next one is uncovering your anger. So, how have you avoided dealing with it? How have you faced it? Are you afraid to expose your shame or guilt? Oh my God, this is going to take me all day. I'm just going to post it on the Facebook, but I think it's worth looking at. It's a longer version of basically the way I would put it, which is that it's for me it's of 3 steps, and before I even get into that, I think it's layered, because Jack Cornfield, again, the Buddhist teacher there, he has a sort of meditation on forgiveness that I try and do when I can, and I highly recommend it because it's led to some of the best sleeps I've had in my life. But he says when you go through it, you forgive yourself for the harm you do to yourself, you forgive yourself for the harm you do to others, you forgive others for the harm they do to you, and he says, to the extent that I am able, I forgive you. So it's
That's
nothing's being
beautiful.
asked more than you're able to give.
Yeah.
Only, it can be layered, is what I'm trying to say. It can be step by step. It can be a tiny little bit at a time, but no one's going to ask you to forgive more than you're able to in this moment. And I just like that. But to me, it's not like a 20-step process. It's like 3 steps, and it's a muscle, really. It can take time. But I think the first thing is acceptance. So the acceptance is that something happened, acceptance of your feelings for it now and your feelings for it in that moment. And as I said, all the literature points to honouring your feelings of betrayal or anger or grief. The feeling needs to be accepted, felt, allowed, and you can there's also feeling impulses. Certain feelings come with an impulse. So maybe sometimes you're angry and you feel like you want to hit something, and maybe you'd be encouraged to release that impulse in terms of imagination rather than hitting somebody, that's very quickly, So get really specific. Ask yourself, what do you want this pain to turn into? Maybe there's like a hook. So the hook is what is holding you back, the portion of the misdeed that is causing you to hold on to it. So that's acceptance. It's the first step. And the second one is understanding. So the idea that in unconditional positive regard in the therapeutic relationship is that you have to look at the client as they're always doing their best. Everyone is always doing their best given what they've got, and even when they're doing something that's shit, that's them doing their best. And perhaps this person, as we said earlier, is more complex than they seem, because it's easiest to stay mad at someone when they're just one thing to you, like, so they're a dickhead, or they're a narcissist, or they're this or that or the other. Whereas if you introduce complexity to the person, like maybe they had a traumatized past, maybe this happened, maybe that happened, and I'm not saying that that's true of every evildoer, but I'm saying that even the possibility of it introduces complexity to the person. It makes them more than just one thing, and that makes it harder to stay mad at them, because you're seeing humanity in them. And where something can't be easily forgiven, it can be understood as an expression of where life has taken them. So complexity, and complexity leads to understanding, empathy, empathizing with the perpetrator. It just happens. Similar parts of the brain light up when people concentrate on forgiveness or empathy, and those areas die down whenever you're thinking about fairness and unfairness. By the way, there was one of the many TED Talks I listened to, and one of the many books I read before doing this was somebody called Sarah Montana, and she talked about forgiving the person who killed her entire family. And she said, "I did not want to be reduced to what happened to me one day, and I could not look at myself in the mirror if I did the same to him." She said, "When you say I forgive you, what you're really saying is, I know what you did, it's not okay, but I recognize you're more than that. I don't want to hold us captive to this thing anymore. I can heal myself, and I don't need anything from you." That's okay, that's step 2, that's understanding. And then the third one is just forgiveness. That comes with time and with thought. Like, they did find in a study that time spent trying to forgive was actually related to the degree of forgiveness. And I guess that comes back to forgiving to the extent that you're ready. So there's a million different models, but for me, those are the 3 steps. in a broad sense, is acceptance, understanding, and then forgiveness. Okay, so that's all I got. That's all I got on the topic.
Well done, Nick.
Thank you.
You've done a hell of a lot of research.
I didn't want to go into. I didn't want to walk blind into it, because I do you know what it was like? I looked at one of our old episodes the other day, and I was like, wow, what a great discussion on that topic. And I was like, has it changed anything on my thoughts? No. Have I learned anything new? No. But I had a lovely time. But I did, and I was like, fuck, I want to make sure people learn something,
It was like this morning looked like a. I don't know, about 9:30, I googled forgiveness quotes.
And hey, that's as valid. That's as valid. This isn't there's not an exam at the end. It's a discussion. But
That's the difference, though. Lou flies by the seat of her pants. Just looking, I'm like a happy heart, and then it looks really
some
methodical.
pants are made for flying,
Yeah, yeah, but it's good to be back. It's good to be back.
Yes.
In there, look.
Yes, indeed.
It wasn't one of the funnies.
Was it not?
No,
I
don't know if we were that funny.
Well, I had a good time, and that's all that matters. Fuck you all.
I was working on.
Thanks for listening to Therapy Geeks. Find us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Deezer, Listen Notes, Stitcher, Podcast Index, and Buzzsprout. Give us a like or a follow or a subscription, whatever your podcast app allows. Thanks for listening.